Brent Venables is out the door. Is he the first of a few? Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We break down Clemson football each and every week with Jason Priester from All Clemson on SI. And, of course, this is huge news, Jason. Brent Venables, and we discussed it last week, and it's always just a guessing game as to what these coaches and their priorities are for their families and themselves and their careers. And for Brent Venables, we know that he has turned down umpteen other opportunities, both at the college and the NFL level, but this was the one that he must have really wanted.
Yeah, he's been very patient. He's maintained it, for ever since he's been at Clemson, that he wouldn't just leave to leave, that if he ever did take a job, it had to be the right one. He loved it at Clemson. His family loved it at Clemson. I think we talked about last week how he even moved his wife's family here within the last year or so. So it was going to take the perfect job at the right time to lure him away. And I don't think there are many jobs in the country that he'd have taken. But this Oklahoma one, you had to at least know there was at least a possibility as soon as you start hearing his name really linked to the job by credible sources. He spent so much time there. He's not from there, but, his kids were born there. He coached there for over a decade. It's kind of like a second home to him. I mean, it just seems like the perfect fit at the perfect time.
Yeah, this was not a guy that is coming up through the ranks and the typical ascension that you're a coordinator and you would like to be a head coach. And so you're going to take whatever job is out there, even at the group of 5 level, to get a head coaching job and get that experience and go. He turned down Auburn. So there's a top 15 job in the country. If he's going to turn down Auburn, he was waiting for the job. And maybe because of his past experience, as you alluded to, at Oklahoma for over a decade, 12 or 13 years, there's an assistant. Maybe this is the only job he would have left Clemson for.
That's very possible. I think he was a lot closer to taking that Auburn job last year than some people realize. I think once they started digging into it a little bit more and he got more familiar with some of the things behind the scenes, that kind of turned him off a little bit. But he was very intrigued by it. There's no doubt about it. But this Oklahoma job, I mean, like I said, he wasn't born there, but it's kind of like home for him. I mean, he's from Kansas. If I'm not mistaken, he was born in Kansas. He went to Kansas State, started out at Kansas State, and spent all that time in Oklahoma. You just alluded to it. This might have been the only job that could have pried him out of Clemson. I mean, and it's hard not to be happy for him. I watched his introductory press conference this morning. I was kind of wondering about how comfortable he'd feel dealing with the media as much. I mean, he looked like a head coach to me. He looked like a new head coach, but he still looked like a head coach. Sounded like a head coach, and he sounded like a guy that never doubted for a second whether he wanted to take that job. It sounded to me like he knew if it was offered, he was going to take it.
We've got Jason Priester on the line to talk to Clemson football. You can catch his work on allclemson.com on SI as the Tigers finish up a 9-3 season and head to the CHEEZ-IT Bowl to take on Iowa State. We'll discuss that in just a second. The big news, of course, Brent Venables, longtime defensive coordinator and the mastermind of 2 national championship defenses and multiple playoff teams and ACC champions, moving on as head coach to Oklahoma. The game that comes to mind for me that obviously prompted the move of a young coach at the time, Dabo Swinney, to go get Brent Venables was Geno Smith throwing for 1,000,000 yards in the Orange Bowl and putting up 70 points, a game in which they were well ahead of a 70-point pace. Who knows how many points they could have put up? That's all they had to do. 70-33 over Clemson, Dabo's first ACC championship team. Obviously, they needed to address the defense, and they went and got Brent Venables. And can you kind of give us some context in regards to the legacy he leaves behind and the work that he did there?
It's really hard to put into words. You nailed it right there. He came, the nail. Kevin Steele he took Kevin Steele's place, and Clemson had a couple of decent defenses under Steele, but they got worse with each year, and culminating in that 70-point drubbing by West Virginia. Man, what a night! But what Venables has done at Clemson has just been remarkable. I was looking at some of the numbers this morning, and I wish I had them right in front of me, but I don't. Over the last 8 years, Clemson has not finished lower than 7th in the country in team sacks. I think they finished first 3 times. They were third. They're third right now, if I'm not mistaken. They finished second one time. But to me, if I think of 2 things when I think of Brent Venables right off the top of my head. One is that performance against Alabama, the 44-16 game, because that was just a masterful defensive performance. It was the perfect game plan against that offense, and they just kind of shut that Alabama offense down. And the second thing that comes to mind is how much Clemson struggled with Georgia Tech's option offense when Venables got to Clemson. Kevin Steele's defenses could not stop it. I mean, that's back when Josh Nesbitt was the quarterback, and they just would run roughshod over those Clemson defenses. A couple of years after Venables is there, no more of that. He shut that thing down. That was one of my favorite things to watch every season, covering Clemson football, was watching that defense shut that option down, because it just had no success against Venables' defense, over Johnson's last several years. I think some of his worst offensive outputs of his career have come against Venables. It was just something to watch as it unfolded, shutting that option down like that. But that's just me, though. That's just a couple of the things I remember.
Yeah, Georgia Tech team that went on to win the Orange Bowl in 2014, and a couple of years later won 9 games and won another New Year's Day bowl game against Kentucky. So they were chewing up other teams in the ACC, no question about that. Got Jason Priester on the line talking Clemson football. Of course, Brent Venables moves on to Oklahoma. You can catch Jason's work at allclemson.com on SI, and please like and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. What would it be the hallmark of his defenses, in addition to what you just said, in regards to the style of play, the scheme?
Aggressiveness. I mean, how many defenses do you watch week in and week out that are aggressive as Clemson, especially in passing situations? He was never scared to bring the house, never scared to blitz. He'd bring guys from everywhere, multiple guys. To me, when I think of Brent Venables' defenses, first word that comes to mind is aggressive, plain and simple.
Also, keep in mind, folks, that the 44-16 game that Jason alludes to, Bama was consensus #1, looked like a arguable greatest team in history, greatest offense in history. Tua had some kind of ridiculous TD to pick ratio, 45-6 or something like that. NFL offensive line, Najee Harris in the backfield, NFL first rounder, 4 NFL first round wide receivers, 4 of them. Yeah, I think they scored 16 points in the first quarter. I think it was 16-14, and that was it.
Yeah,
Done.
that was it. Yeah, it was really a masterful performance that night. It's one of the things I will always remember being a Clemson fan was watching that defense shut down. What you just said was supposed to be one of the greatest teams ever, not just offense's greatest teams ever. I mean, I remember coming on your show before that game, and I picked Clemson to lose, man, and I caught all kind of flack for it. But yeah, that game that night is one of the things that I will always remember about Brent Venables at Clemson. After a certain period of time, you just realize it's time to move on and do something else. And I think that's where we're at with Tony Elliott. I think this Clemson program has been very fortunate to keep this coaching staff in place as long as it's been in place. You just don't see it in college football very often with the continuity Clemson's had. And the program is really at a crossroads, with Venables leaving, looking like Elliott's going to leave. Big offseason coming up for Dabo Swinney, no doubt about that.
Last time I remember Clemson missing the playoffs, they slapped Oklahoma upside the head in a bowl game, I believe in Orlando. That would have been following 2014. Now here they are. Next time they miss a playoff game, they take on the Big 12 and again, and this time Iowa State in the CHEEZ-IT Bowl. Long-standing New Year's Day, Christmas time bowl tradition there, much, like the Rose Bowl, Cotton Bowl, the Cheez-It Bowl, of course. But your thoughts about the Cheez-It Bowl, and if anything's been stated, I don't know if there's been a news conference yet with Dabo commenting on the matchup against the Cyclones.
Yeah, we got to talk to Dabo for a few minutes yesterday. He's in Las Vegas for CJ Spiller's induction to the Hall of Fame ceremony tomorrow. He was at the Raiders game yesterday, and the media session coincided with why he was at the Raiders game, so he had to do the Zoom call from the tunnel there at the stadium. So it didn't last very long. He and Matt Campbell both spoke. There wasn't a lot said yet. I don't even think either coaching staff's really started to break down the opponents yet. But for a week or so, I kept hearing Clemson was going to end up in the Gator Bowl. That it was going to be the Gator Bowl against Texas A&M, and that's Jimbo Fisher. That's an opponent and a coach that Clemson's very familiar with. Played Texas A&M a couple of times in the last few years. Very familiar with Jimbo Fisher, coming from Florida State. So when I found out it was going to be the Cheez-It Bowl against Iowa State, that's a little intriguing to me. That's a team Clemson's never played before. I know they're only 7-5 this year. I think they're a little bit better than their record. I think most people, including myself, thought they were going to be better than what they have been this season. With the way Clemson's offense has played this year, just take the coaching stuff out of it. Just the matchups on paper. I think this is kind of an even matchup. It might turn out to be a pretty good game.
A lot of people liked Iowa State coming into the season. They were bringing back one of the best tight ends in the nation, Charlie Kolar. Their starting quarterback, Brock Purdy, one of the best wide receivers in the conference, Xavier Hutchinson, and 5 offensive linemen. The entire offensive line group which was grab any preseason magazine, rated a top 5 offensive line, and Breece Hall, considered one of the best running backs in the nation. So they were loaded and set to go, and lost a lot of close games, and it comes out at 7-5. And Clemson, Iowa State. So a lot of people will dismiss it as it's a bowl game, doesn't really matter, exhibition game, whatever. If you love college football and you get matchups, like Jason and I talked about this before we started to record, you get to see matchups, Power 5 matchups that you don't get to see otherwise. I think it's great. I'll enjoy the game. Absolutely. I'll be there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, it kind of, I don't know a whole lot about this Iowa State team this year yet, other than they've just.
I gave you the scouting report right there on the offense. There,
you did. That was more than I already knew. I promise. I hadn't seen much of them this year. I did know that I thought they were going to be better than 7-5, but I'll start diving into them more as we get closer.
All right, good stuff.
This coaching stuff has kept us busy for the last week.
Absolutely. And National Signing Day coming up 2 weeks from Wednesday. Anything new on that front?
Well, that's another thing to consider when you got a coaching change. Clemson's got 14 guys committed. I think more than half of them are defensive guys, or maybe half of them. 7 of them, might have been 7 of them are defensive guys, bunch of defensive backs. I mean, you got to wonder how many of those guys, might be considering backing off that verbal pledge now that Venables isn't going to be there any longer. I think one guy to keep an eye on is Jaron Connect out of Kansas. He was a Brent Venables guy from the beginning. He's the guy that Venables wanted and Venables targeted, and he's been committed to Clemson for a while now. But if somebody's going to leave, I could see it being a guy like that. Maybe a Keon Sabb. He's been committed for a few months, but he was up in Ann Arbor a couple weeks ago for the Michigan win over Ohio State. Michigan has stayed on him, was one of their finalists. It'll be interesting to see if he kind of rethinks things now that Venables is gone. But to me, those are the 2 guys to keep an eye on, as far as decommitments and stuff like that. And I remember when Venables came to Clemson from Oklahoma. It seems like I remember that, he was not interested in bringing any of the Oklahoma's recruits with him to Clemson. That was something he just wasn't interested in. So if Clemson does lose anybody in one or whatever happens to end up at Oklahoma with Venables, I don't think it'll be anything done that was underhanded or shady. It'll all be above board. I just don't think Venables is that kind of guy.
Iowa State's consolation prize for falling short of the Big 12 championship game this year, the CHEEZ-IT Bowl against Clemson. We got Levi Stevenson on the line from Wide Right Natty Light to help us break it down. And, of course, like the video, share the videos out on social media. Subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. We get you stuff for the playoffs and the entire bowl season. Levi, what's going on?
Not too much. Just another good day to be a Cyclone.
All right. Well, you'll have to tell us about it. So I'm going to throw the questions out there and you expound. So how is Cyclone Nation feeling about a Clemson opponent in a bowl game? I think you're excited, especially because of the name there. I mean, if you'd have told me 5-10 years ago, even 5 or 10 years ago, that Iowa State would be playing Notre Dame, Oregon, and Clemson in 3 consecutive bowl games, I'd be a little bit shocked. But you know, even if Clemson is having a down year, it's still a good team full with a lot of big time recruits and talent and stuff like that. So I think it's an exciting proposition to play a school like Clemson that is been, you know, up there with Alabama and, you know, been kind of the gold standard in college football the last five years or so, especially. So it's an exciting matchup for us. I know Clemson fans may or may not be super excited about it because we're, you know, probably Iowa State has probably never crossed the minds of most of those fans, but that's all right. But you know, I think they'll realize pretty quickly this is an Iowa State team that can beat Clemson. Just like Oregon last year. A lot of their fans didn't really know too much about Iowa State, and what happened. Well, I can only vouch for one Clemson writer who said that he's good with the matchup. He's interested and intrigued because they've never seen Iowa State and would like to see a different team. So the first question that comes to mind with any bowl matchup these days is, of course, who's not going to play, and especially with this Iowa State team being so senior laden on the offensive side of the ball in particular. Do we know any decisions that have been made at this point?
I think the only one that is somewhat in question would be Breece Hall, because he's a junior running back. He has a chance to be first running back off the board in the draft. From everything that I've heard, and it seems there's a lot of coming from a lot of places that Breece wants to play. If it was Breece's choice, he would play. What really remains to be seen there is if an agent is going to come in and say, you really shouldn't play this bowl game and you need to start preparing for the draft. That would be the only reason that Breece Hall would not play. As far as I know, though, I have not heard anything that would suggest that anybody else is not considering playing. I think everybody wants to play one more game, especially against Clemson. It's a really good name to go out. You know, if Brock Purdy and Mike Rose and Charlie Kohler and all those guys can go out, finish their careers by beating Clemson, that's a nice thing you can put up on your trophy cabinet.
Absolutely. Got Levi Stevenson here. We're talking Iowa State football. Cyclones at 7-5, Clemson 9-3. CHEEZ-IT Bowl matchup. You can catch Levi's work at Wide Right Natty Light on SB Nation. So, for as much as you've been able to delve into the matchup at this point, are there any particular portions of this game that stand out to you?
Well, you know, I haven't watched them live, Clemson live, much this year. But looking back through some of their old games and different things that I've seen, they're really similar to 2 other people that have been on Iowa State's schedule as far as just kind of the balance of their team, and that's Iowa and Oklahoma State. Really good, solid defense, lots of great playmakers all over the place, an offense that can struggle to move the ball at times. The interesting part is so part of the reason that Iowa State has had trouble with Iowa, especially recently, even though Iowa is a very poor offensive team, is because kind of schematically it's kind of a weird matchup for Iowa State. It's a scheme that Iowa State doesn't play any other time of the year. They're not really built to play that kind of, and that's why they have struggled with Iowa. But then you have a team like Oklahoma State. That's another really excellent defense, elite defense. But offense was up and down, you know, for the most part. But that was a team that Iowa State beat at home, 24-21. And that's a team that Iowa State's always played close. So Clemson probably falls closer to Oklahoma State than they do Iowa as far as so. It's a defense-heavy team that can struggle to move the ball at times, but schematically they're much more similar to Oklahoma State than they are Oklahoma, and to the point where, you know, the now departed Brent Venables literally came to Ames a few years ago to learn Iowa State's defense. I mean, that's how schematically similar they are. So it's not going to be an offense or a defense that's kind of unusual that they're not used to seeing, because they do run a very similar type of scheme to what you see from a lot of the schools in the Big 12. Now, obviously, the big catch with Clemson is they're loaded with 4- and 5-star talent all over the place. Now, some of that has come to fruition, some of it hasn't. Some of it's been hurt, some of it hasn't. Some of it may skip the bowl game, and some of it might not. Like a guy like Justin Ross, yeah, is it?
Yep.
Yeah, Justin Ross. Yeah, he might not play. He might play. He might not. I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard anything one way or the other. But a guy like him could really impact Clemson's offense and give him a chance, because I wouldn't love the matchup of him on Iowa State's corners, because that's the weakness of the defense, is the corners, and they have been for a lot of the year. So that would worry me. But I think I think when you look at the last betting line I looked at had Iowa State at a -1.5. They were a 1.5 point favorite over Clemson, and I think that even an unranked Iowa State is a 1.5 point favorite over a ranked Clemson. If that kind of shows you. So even Vegas is like, this is actually a pretty good matchup. It's two very good defensive teams that sometimes are very good offensively, sometimes struggle to move the ball a little bit. And they're two schematically fairly similar teams. It's just the talent gap. That's the main difference, and how good each team is at using what talent they do have on the roster.
So Levi, set us up for a Iowa State attack minus Breece Hall if he's not playing.
So minus Breece Hall makes this very interesting, because you have Jarrell Brock. He's the obvious starter. He's very good, former 4-star running back. He came in with Breece Hall as kind of, I would say, had two big-time running backs in that class. Breece Hall was the first one. Jarrell Brock was there as well. And Jarrell Brock has been Breece Hall's backup only because Breece Hall is really good. Jarrell Brock is a very good running back. The quandary becomes who backs him up, because the two behind him, Deion Silas and Eli Sanders, are both true freshmen, and both have used all four games of their red shirt. So you either just have Jarrell Brock and you just work with it, or you have Deion Silas and Eli Sanders, and one of them burns a red shirt. The other option is you could dip down into the walk-ons. But there's actually one running back. He hasn't played hardly any running back at all. Is Rory Walling. He's been a special teams all-star for Iowa State for a couple years now. But he is technically on the roster as a running back. So theoretically, you could see him take snaps as a backup running back. I was assuming he'd be mostly a pass blocker. I don't know how many carries they would actually give him. But without Breece Hall, Jarrell Brock is your guy, because he'll be the guy next year. He'll be the lead guy next year. Deion Silas and Eli Sanders will get plenty of carries next year too. But Jarrell Brock is the lead guy next year. So it makes sense that if Breece Hall can't play, you're going to feed Jarrell Brock and you get him carries and carries and carries. He's a really physical running back. Probably he's less agile but more physical than Breece. They were kind of a little bit of a thunder and lightning if Breece wasn't so well rounded. But Jarrell he's that dude. He can truck people. He's really physical. A really good fit for Iowa State's scheme. Honestly, he's like a David Montgomery kind of physical, where he will absolutely put a shoulder into you whenever you need to.
The oxymoron of these bowl games, in my view, and I may not have selected the right term, is that on one hand, they're considered by many people to be exhibition games. They've gotten to the point where for a lot of people they're exhibition games, although they still count on that team's final record, and there's still a poll taken with the AP and the coaches poll that takes into consideration the score of the bowl game, so it's counted.
Sure.
At the same time, unless we're talking about some magnanimous, ridiculous 1 versus 2 matchup, or Ohio State Michigan or something to that degree, more people will watch almost every one of these teams during bowl season than watch them the entire season, because there's usually 15 or 20 games on at any one given time. So the college football collective nation is divided, as opposed to Clemson, Iowa State is going to be the only game in town. And if people want to watch college football, and they do during the holidays, they're going to be watching that game. So and then when you hear resumes of coaches brought up. You know, bowl games come up. Oh, well, he's only 5-9 in bowl games. So there's this strange importance.
Does it matter or doesn't it? Yeah.
Ends of the spectrum where they're given this huge weight and everybody watches them, but then people consider them exhibitions to a certain extent. And so I get it, but that put into the light of where Iowa State is as a program, how important is this bowl game?
It is very important for a couple reasons. One is the bowl practices, which are really, really important. They may get lost a little bit, but having a couple weeks extra of practice, knowing that this is your last game going in, this is where a lot of the younger guys get lots and lots of reps, is these bowl practices. Well, Iowa State's going to have a lot of turnover after the season. You're going to have a lot of roster turnover after the season as far as their starters go. Well, getting Hunter Deckers and Deion Silas and Eli Sanders and Cole Peterson, a lot of these guys that you probably don't know, but they're going to be coming up and they'll be starting for Iowa State sooner rather than later. Getting those guys lots and lots of really good practices, and they're basically running as the starters, is extremely valuable to get guys on the right foot heading into spring workouts and then spring practice, especially. So it's tons and tons of good reps for those young guys, and especially like a Jarrell Brock, who's been getting mostly reps as a kind of a blocking back and then just an occasional power back when they needed some short yardage or something. He's going to get lots and lots of starter reps that week, and which is what you want for your starting running back next year. The second part of this is the same reason that it was important when we played Oregon or we played Notre Dame. It's a big name, and lots of people are going to watch that name, and so it's exposure for Iowa State. And so if Iowa State goes out there and puts a hurting on Clemson like they did Oregon last year, that looks really good. Even though people understand that Clemson is probably a little bit down, whatever, but going in there and beating up on Clemson is a good look for Iowa State. That's one that you're going to. And also part of it too is you're going to capture an audience that ordinarily probably doesn't really tune into your games very much. If it was a Big Ten schools and Big 12 lay in the same footprint, so a lot of them, there's a lot of overlap in who sees what games and stuff like that, especially in Iowa, obviously. But the ACC, especially like the south part of the ACC, the ACC crowd doesn't really watch a lot of Big 12 anything. So you're getting in front of a whole new set of eyeballs. They can say, "Wow, they can, if Iowa State goes out and put on a good performance, say, wow, this is an interesting program. This is something I want to keep up with going forward too." It's great exposure. It's down in Orlando, which is a state, down in Florida, which is a state that Iowa State has had success in recruiting before, and they're really kind of making more of a push there now too. Almost kind of interestingly enough, kind of in lieu of Texas, they've kind of pulled out of Texas a little bit and then gone towards Florida. Because I think there's more recruiting connections down there. So you're in Florida where you're trying to get more recruits. They were just in Florida. Matt Campbell, Nate Scheelhaas, and Tom Manning were all in Florida visiting recruits, I think yesterday or something like that. Yeah, it would have been yesterday because they're hosting Austin Stogner as a transfer target today. But it's new eyeballs. It's a great name. It's an interesting bowl. It's the CHEEZ-IT Bowl. So whoever wins this thing is going to get a big bowl of Cheez-Its dumped on the coach and stuff like that. So it's just kind of funny. It's a little quirky like that. It's a great exposure opportunity for Iowa State.
Austin Stogner. So the Oklahoma tight end.
Yes.
Maybe coming your way. He's a good player.
Potentially. It sounds like it's us, South Carolina, and Ohio State are kind of the main three. Now, obviously, Ohio State's Ohio State. But Iowa State has now built a reputation of we like to use our tight ends, and we use them really well. And you're going to get plenty of targets. If you know what you're doing, you'll get plenty of targets, and you'll be an integral part of that offense too. So there's a big appeal there where you can get a lot of balls thrown your way playing tight end at Iowa State, and he'd be a direct fit right there with Charlie Kohler. You could slide him in the same exact place and do the same exact thing with Austin Stogner. I don't know what the feel is on where he's going to go. I don't know. Ohio State's obviously a big poll. South Carolina's in the SEC. So there's stiff competition there, but. Schematically, Austin Stogner fits the offense perfectly. I mean, if the visit goes well, I think he was there today and is there still tomorrow. If the visit goes well, then Iowa State's probably got a decent shot at him. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm not in the head of Austin Stogner, and I don't know what he's looking for. If he's looking for more exposure before he goes to the NFL, Ohio State's probably your ticket because it's Ohio State. But it'd be interesting. That would be an awesome pickup for that offense to replace Charlie Kohler just like that.
Got Levi Stevenson here talking up Iowa State, taking in Clemson in the CHEEZ-IT Bowl. And, of course, National Signing Day is coming up as well. Before we get to that, Any big name job that's been open over the last couple of years? Matt Campbell is one of the first names that comes up. This past offseason, it seems like it's been Luke Fickell, James Franklin before they signed contract extensions, Matt Campbell. But it seemed like as the search narrowed, whether that was Campbell, shunning that particular program and shutting down the talk, or them going in a different direction, it seemed like he's the guy, and definitely in the top 3, that's brought up every time there's a job opening, a big one.
Yeah.
And then as it narrows down, then it has gone in a different direction. Do you think that's because he's that committed to Iowa State, or do you have any kind of feeling? I know that I'm asking again, just like the previous question, is people ask me all the time to get into the minds and hearts of people, but how committed he is to Iowa State, at least on the surface.
So it's interesting, Coach. This whole process is very interesting for Iowa State fans, because Iowa State's athletic department is notoriously very airtight. Like, it's not like a Texas or one of these blue bloods where information leaks out all over the place because there's boosters talking and all this. Iowa State's pretty airtight. They do a pretty good job where it's Jamie, Matt, and like Skip or Greg Brabenek. He's one of the main other guys up there, kind of the director up there of football operations. I can't remember what his title is, but it's like those 3 guys, and like outside of that, there's a good chance nobody really knows what's going on, because they keep that circle pretty darn tight. So it's a little bit maddening from our end, because when you hear rumors of Matt Campbell's linked to this, they talk to him and this, whatever, it's always coming from the other side. It's always coming from the other team's message boards, or some other booster from that school is leaking something. How reliable is that actually? Because if USC is looking for a coach and some USC booster says, well, we're going to go after Matt Campbell, like, I mean, maybe you might call him, and you'd be kind of silly not to. An athletic director at this point is kind of silly. You're probably not doing your job if you don't at least try to call Matt Campbell. But how much can you actually rely on? Like, oh, well, they met with him, they interviewed, la la la. And my favorite line that always comes up is, we've talked to his people. Someone's gonna have to tell me who Matt Campbell's people are, because the dude doesn't have an agent. Matt Campbell is Matt Campbell's people. So if someone, like, that's usually a good red flag right away, is if someone says they met with Campbell's people, it's gone. Like, that's, you can immediately discount that, whatever they were just saying after that. But it's, like I said, it's always a really frustrating thing too, because it always comes from the other side, but we're still inclined to at least look into it and say, because we know that other teams want Matt Campbell, and we know the history of coaches wanting to go to bigger jobs. We know those 2 things. Now, the problem is that you have to also factor in this enormous, the biggest variable in this equation is, what does Matt Campbell want? And it's always an interesting thing, because he's such an honest and forthright person, and he says he's extremely consistent. He said the same thing from day one to now. He says it over and over and over again, where it sounds like a broken record, and it sounds like he's just truly dishing out coach speak. There is nobody in this world better at coach speak than Matt Campbell. I will tell you that. You're not going to get anything useful from him out of a press conference. But what he is, though, is extremely consistent in talking to, like, former players and stuff like that. The man, like, what he is in press conferences, what he tells you is not, like, it is coach speak, but it's also, like, eminently true. Like, it's not, none of it's BS. Like, he actually believes in doing this process. When he said, the conference championship was never our goal and stuff like that, I mean, he actually, to an extent, does believe that. I mean, I still believe 100% that, like, that wasn't necessarily, that was a way to measure it maybe, but his goal is to make Iowa State the best team it can be. And however you get there, as long as, if at the last game of the season you're playing the best that you can be, that's mission accomplished for Matt Campbell. So you have to take into this account that Matt Campbell's kind of a different cat. He does things his own way. And he said too, like, there was like 2 press conferences he had during this whole, like, 2 or 3 weeks when the USC thing was kind of coming up and the LSU stuff was coming up. He had like 2 press conferences the whole time, and both times, one, he seemed very annoyed that he was being even asked about it. But then 2, he said, after all this, after Lincoln Riley signed with USC or whatever, he had another press conference afterwards and says, like, I think I've shown, I have to find the exact quote, but essentially, to paraphrase, he said, I think I've shown through my actions that what I'm saying is true, that I think I've shown through my actions what I mean and who I am as a person. And while they have not yet announced an extension for Matt Campbell, like, there was never anything. One, you don't need an extension every single year to validate that you're coming back, because he's signed through like 2028 or something, like whatever it is, or 2026. And so, I mean, you don't need an extension. You already have like 5 extra years on your contract. You can wait a season to do that. But it's an interesting saga, and I'm at the point now where I trust Jamie and Matt well enough. Jamie Pollard, the athletic director, and Matt Campbell, at this point, that when they say we're committed to this, we're trying to build Iowa State a new one, I have no evidence whatsoever, no reason to not believe that that's what they mean. So I'm at the point now where I will believe Matt Campbell is leaving when I actually see an official press release come out that says Matt Campbell's been hired as a head coach at wherever, whatever. Until then, I would be very, very hesitant to even consider rumors from most schools at this point.
National Signing Day is less than a week away, and I'm seeing recruiting rankings connected to Iowa State that I've not seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Third in the Big 12, according to 247 Sports.
First in the new Big 12.
5
yeah.
in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
18 hard commits.
Yeah.
So that's going to be close to the full class.
Mm-hmm. They've got most of their class already lined up. And yeah, you're right. They're at 25. They were at, I think just a little while ago, before I think maybe a couple of them cut some other commits, they're at like 19 for a while, which Iowa State pretty reliably lands in the high 40s, mid 50s, that kind of range. So a 25th overall class is a different different animal for Iowa State. And part of it is fuel. I mean, they've got lots and lots of guys that, instead of having a class full of lots of low and mid 3 stars and maybe, a couple guys hanging out in the high 3 stars, now you've got a class that's loaded with mid 3 stars, a really good handful of high 3 stars, and then you've got 2 4 stars plus a couple other guys that are just knocking right on the door there. And we've seen it as a pattern through Matt Campbell, though, is that they have a really, really incredible eye for talent. They're as far as identifying talent, Matt Campbell's staff is excellent. I mean, they found and offered J.J. McCarthy, right? Yeah, with the Michigan quarterback. They offered him back in 8th grade. I mean, before anybody had even really talked to him. And they keep finding guys like Mike Rose and Charlie Kohler, digging these guys out of nowhere, and their ability to identify talent is really excellent, to the point now where I think I get the impression that college program, like that upper level programs, are starting to kind of follow Iowa State a little bit and say, okay, Matt Campbell found this guy, maybe we should probably give him a second look, type of thing. And then, or of course, then an Ohio State or someone else can swoop in and be like, okay, we know they're fine because Matt Campbell looked at him. Not to say that he's the ultimate barometer and that he's incapable of missing, because they have missed on some recruits. But as far as identifying talent, they're very, very good at it. And now they're starting to land it. We're starting to see the fruits of going to a Big 12 title game and winning a Fiesta Bowl. We're starting to see those fruits. This class features arguably maybe the biggest recruiting coup in school history as far as in-state goes, by getting Hunter Deo. He was for a long time. He was the number 1 recruit in the class for this year. Now Xavier Nwankpa, who just 5-star, just committed to Iowa, he ended up taking over. But for a long time, Hunter Deo was the number one prospect in this class out of Iowa, and his parents are big Hawkeyes. He was a Hawkeye lean forever. And then Matt Campbell swooped in and got him this summer. And there's no reason at all to believe that he's not going to continue to sign for Iowa State or any of that. He's a 4-star, 0.9 something on 247. That was a huge, huge recruiting win in state. And if Hunter Deo turns out to be a really great player and develops and goes to the NFL and has, and all that, that's a huge, huge recruiting win for Iowa State. Because part of the deal was with, Iowa kind of had their pick of the litter for a long time, and then Iowa State would just get whoever else. And that was a guy that Iowa wanted. and Iowa State went in and got him. And that's a big win. Just to even sign him is a big win. But now if you can turn him into a really great player and say, if you're a top level player in Iowa, you can come to Iowa State and you can go to the NFL. You don't have to go to Iowa to do that. So it's a huge win. Another guy that came out of there, Greg Gaines. He's a 4-star wide receiver now out of Tampa Bay, Florida, or out of Tampa, Florida, I should say. He's a really good player. I would not shock me if you start seeing him get some significant snaps by the end of next season. He'll just be a true freshman, but man, that guy can play. And you've got, this class is really awesome. You've got a big another tight end there. It's a high 3-star, 0.88 on 247. Andrew Keller was another big Iowa target. Rocco Becht he's the quarterback for this class. Rocco Becht. He's out of Zephyr Hills, Florida. He goes to this high school called Wiregrass Ranch. This is a perfect example of identifying talent for Matt Campbell. When he started out, I'm gonna pull him up actually. I'm gonna pull up his timeline because I believe when he started out, so his rating history has been pretty stellar. He started out as a .8266, so that's a low 3-star, and currently he has now risen up to a .8765. So he's vaulted all the way from a low 3-star all the way to starting to flirt with a 4-star at this point. And he was, I think, when he went to the Rivals camp this past summer, he was given an award for being the best at the camp. That's an excellent example of identifying talent and getting him right away. Will McDonald is another perfect example of that. Basically going into Wisconsin, grabbing Will McDonald and peeling out and finding the best pass rusher in school history with really out any contention at all. So this class is so far a product of the recent success. We were always kind of wondering what happens when we start winning more. How does the recruiting pick up pace? What does that look like? Well, turns out when you win a New Year's Six bowl game against a big brand like Oregon, recruits start to take notice, and we're seeing it now. Even as other schools pick up more prospects as we get closer to signing day, and Iowa State probably won't pick up a lot more commitments because the class is mostly full at this point. So they might slide back a little bit just because other people are picking up more commitments. But even if they end up, low to mid 30s, somewhere in there, that's awesome. That's a huge step forward for Iowa State. And they've got a lot of guys in this class that can start pretty close to right away if they need to. But if they become more developmental type prospects, they can be really big impact players down the road. You've got a lot of really nice players in this that can make an impact for Iowa State for a long time.
And when you've got a coaching staff and a head coach in particular that can identify diamonds in the rough that others are not recognizing, and then add on to that some of the obvious players that everyone is looking at as a 4-star or a mid to high 3-star, and you tack on that layer as well, then look out.
And all of a sudden, right. And for a long time, Iowa State's roster had Big 12 players starting, but behind that it was rough. Now you've got your 2 deep. Even beyond that is Big 12, Power 5 starting caliber level players all the way back, and that's been the biggest transformation in the roster too. Is you have quality depth all the way back, where you can play 22, 25 guys on defense in a game, and they're all good.
The future looking good at Iowa State, despite a disappointing 5-loss season. The Cheez-It Bowl's coming up in a few weeks against Clemson. Check out Levi Stevenson's work there on SB Nation on Wide Right Natty Light. Levi, we always appreciate you stopping by, laying down the knowledge for us.
I appreciate you having me. I always love coming by.